My name is Caitlyn Morrison, and at 67, I never expected to be disrespected at my only son Thomas's wedding. After years of sacrifice as a widow raising him alone, I was beaming with pride that day until his bride, Jessica, approached me. "Can you stand by the bathroom wall, so you do not ruin the wedding photos with your age?" she said with a plastic smile. Without a word, I walked to the gift table, took back my special box and left. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear what was in that box that had them calling me non-stop afterward. Being a single mother was never part of my plan. When my husband Jack died suddenly from a heart attack, Thomas was only 8 years old. The shock nearly destroyed me, but I had no time for extended grief with a young boy depending on me. We had modest savings, but not enough to maintain our lifestyle long-term. Within weeks, I was working 2 jobs, administrative assistant during weekdays and waitressing weekend evenings at a local restaurant. My dreams of returning to college for my art degree vanished overnight. Those early years tested every fiber of my being. I would race from my day job to pick up Thomas from after-school care, help with homework, cook dinner, then leave him with our elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson when I had evening shifts. The guilt was crushing, but Thomas never complained. He would have his homework done when I returned home exhausted at midnight, often falling asleep on the couch waiting for me. Despite the financial struggle, we formed a bond that I thought was unbreakable. I remember teaching Thomas to ride his bike in Wilson Park one Sunday, after working a grueling night shift. My eyes were heavy with fatigue, but his determination kept me going. When he finally balanced on his own, pedaling forward with a whoop of triumph, the pure joy on his face made my exhaustion meaningless. School projects became our special time together. Thomas inherited his father's analytical mind and loved science. One night stands out in my memory. Thomas had a solar system project due, and we stayed up until 3 a.m. painting styrofoam balls and arranging them on wire hangers. Even as my fingers cramped from the detailed work, watching his concentration as he carefully applied the rings to Saturn filled me with indescribable love. College seemed like an impossible dream for Thomas, but I was determined. I opened a special savings account when he was 9, depositing small amounts from each paycheck. Some weeks it was only $5, but I never missed a contribution. I cut corners everywhere I could, buying secondhand clothes, skipping meals occasionally, never taking vacations. By his senior year of high school, I had managed to save enough for his first 2 years at State University. Thomas was always a kind child. In elementary school, his teacher called to tell me how he had befriended a boy with autism when other children avoided him. In high school, he tutored struggling classmates for free. He had his father's gentle eyes and my stubborn chin, a combination that made him both compassionate and resilient. His academic achievements made my chest swell with pride. Straight, as through high school scholarship offers from 3 universities and finally graduating with honors in business administration. At his college graduation, watching him accept his diploma, I could barely contain myself. All those double shifts, all those sacrifices had been worth it. My son had opportunities his father and I never had. When Thomas landed his first corporate job in marketing at age 23, I finally felt I could breathe. He insisted on helping with my mortgage payments, though I tried to refuse. "Mom, you gave me everything," he said. "Let me give a little back." We settled into a comfortable routine of Sunday dinners at my house, holiday celebrations, and frequent phone calls throughout the week. I started taking part-time art classes at the community center, finally pursuing my deferred dream. The changes began 3 years ago when Thomas, then 32, met Jessica at a corporate fundraiser. Their relationship developed quickly, and I noticed the shift in small ways at first. Our Sunday dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. His calls grew shorter, more distracted. When we did talk, Jessica's name dominated the conversation. Jessica's promotion, Jessica's family connections, Jessica's taste in home decor. I told myself this was natural. A man falling in love should be excited about his partner. I remembered how I had gushed about Jack when we first met. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach when Thomas canceled our annual mother-son weekend trip to the lake house that had been in our family for generations. "Jessica and I have been invited to her parents' condo in Aspen that weekend," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. The lake house had been our special place since he was a child, where we would fish from the dock and make s'mores by the fire pit while sharing our dreams. "Of course you should go skiing," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "We can reschedule our trip." We never did. As months passed, Thomas visited less frequently. When he did come over, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. Once it rang while we were having coffee, and I saw Jessica's name flash on the screen. The change in his demeanor was immediate. He sat straighter, his voice pitched higher, as he assured her he would be leaving soon. Something in his eyes looked like fear. I pushed away my concerns. My son was a grown man making his own choices. If Jessica made him happy, then I would be happy for him. But late at night, I would look at old photographs of Thomas and me, wondering what had changed, and if I was losing the only family I had left. I met Jessica for the first time at Giovanni's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown that was well beyond my usual budget. Thomas had texted that morning, "Jessica wants to meet you. Dinner at 7. I spent hours choosing my outfit, settling on a navy blue dress I had bought on sale for a colleague's retirement party. I wanted to make a good impression. When I arrived, they were already seated. Jessica was striking, tall and slender, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and an expensive-looking cream-colored blouse. She rose gracefully, offering a manicured hand and a smile that never quite reached her cool blue eyes. "So nice to finally meet you," she said, her gaze quickly scanning me from head to toe. "Thomas has told me so much about you." Her emphasis on "so much" carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. Thomas seemed nervous, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced by an anxious energy as he pulled out my chair. Jessica dominated the conversation, speaking about her family's banking business, her MBA from Wharton, and their recent trip to the Amalfi Coast. When I mentioned my community college art classes, she nodded with what felt like practiced politeness. "How quaint," she said. "Creativity is such a nice hobby for retirement years." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I noticed he ordered Jessica's wine preference rather than the Cabernet he usually enjoyed. When I asked about his recent project at work, Jessica answered for him. "Thomas has been completely restructuring his approach since we discussed strategies. His team was underperforming until we identified the core issues." "We?" I asked, looking at my son. "Jessica has an amazing business mind," Thomas said quickly. "She helped me see where I was going wrong." The Thomas I knew had always been confident in his professional abilities. This deference to Jessica's judgment seemed out of character. As dinner progressed, I observed how Jessica checked Thomas's phone when it buzzed, frowning at a message from his colleague. Later, she made a comment about his tie being off-brand for the restaurant. Each time, Thomas apologized or adjusted according to her preferences. I learned about Jessica's background between the lines of her carefully curated stories. Her family owned a regional banking chain with branches in 3 states. She had attended private schools, spent summers in Europe, and expected a certain lifestyle that Thomas was clearly stretching his finances to provide. The watch on his wrist was new, a luxury brand I knew he couldn't afford on his marketing director salary. Despite the warning signals flashing in my mind, I smiled and engaged pleasantly. This woman was important to my son, and I would not be the mother who interfered. When Thomas excused himself to the restroom, Jessica leaned forward. "Your home in Oak Ridge. Thomas mentioned it's quite too vintage. Have you considered selling? The market for older properties to developers is quite favorable right now." The suggestion felt like a slap. My modest 3-bedroom house with its slightly overgrown garden had been home for 35 years. It was where Thomas had grown up, where every doorframe had pencil marks tracking his height. "I'm quite attached to my home," I replied evenly. "Sentimentality can be expensive," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I understand some people prefer familiarity over advancement." Thomas returned before I could respond, and I let the comment pass. Throughout the rest of dinner, Jessica made similar subtle remarks about my sensible car, my public school teaching career before retirement, even my choice of dessert being brave considering women our age struggle with metabolism. Each comment was delivered with such polished civility that objecting would have seemed oversensitive. Thomas either didn't notice or chose not to acknowledge the undercurrent. He seemed focused on Jessica's approval, laughing too loudly at her jokes, agreeing with her opinions before she'd fully expressed them. 6 months later, Thomas called to announce their engagement. The proposal had happened at Jessica's parents' lakefront mansion during a weekend visit. I wasn't invited to the small celebration dinner that followed, learning about it only through photos Thomas texted afterward. The engagement party was held at Jessica's parents' home, a sprawling colonial-style mansion with manicured grounds and a 3-car garage housing luxury vehicles. I felt distinctly out of place among the wealthy guests in designer clothes, discussing vacation properties and stock portfolios. Jessica's mother Elaine greeted me with the same practiced smile her daughter had perfected. "Caitlyn, what a unique necklace," she said, eyeing my cherished silver pendant. "A gift from Jack on our 10th anniversary. So refreshingly unpretentious." Her husband Richard, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes, barely acknowledged my presence beyond a cursory handshake before turning to more important conversations with business associates. Throughout the evening, I was introduced as Thomas's mother, rather than by my name, while Jessica's parents were presented with their full titles and professional achievements. When dinner was served, I found myself seated at a table with distant acquaintances rather than with the central family group. I had brought a special engagement gift, a vintage silver frame containing a photo of Thomas as a child, his face alight with laughter as he played at our family lake house. Along with it was a handwritten card explaining that my wedding gift would be something significant from our family heritage. I had decided months ago that I would give Thomas and his bride the deed to our lake house property worth several $100,000 in the current market. It had been in our family for 3 generations, and while the transfer would leave me with significantly less inheritance to pass on, I wanted Thomas to create his own family memories there. When Jessica opened my modest engagement gift, her expression flickered with poorly concealed disappointment. "Oh, vintage, thank you." She quickly set it aside to exclaim over her friend's gift of crystal champagne flutes. Thomas caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "Sorry," but made no move to join me or include me in the central celebrations. I left early, driving home with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with loss. In the months that followed, I tried calling Thomas several times to discuss wedding plans, hoping to be included in some of the traditional mother of the groom activities. Each time he seemed rushed, offering vague updates before cutting our conversation short. "Jessica's handling everything, Mom. Her parents are covering all the costs, so they're making most decisions. But surely there are some traditions I could help with. The rehearsal dinner, perhaps?" "Oh, Jessica's parents insist on hosting that at their country club. You know how it is." I didn't know, actually. In my world, the mother of the groom had certain meaningful roles, and being shut out of all of them hurt more than I could express. Still, I held on to hope that things would improve after the wedding. I focused on my special gift. The lake house deed would be placed in my grandmother's antique jewelry box, crafted from burled walnut with intricate inlay work. The box itself was valuable, but what it would contain represented the largest financial gift I could possibly give. More importantly, it was a piece of our family history, the place where Thomas had been happiest as a child. I believed that once they were married, once Jessica felt secure in her place in Thomas's life, the subtle exclusion would end. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. I was still hoping for the best, still believing in the unbreakable bond between mother and son. The systematic exclusion from wedding planning began subtly, then grew more obvious as the months passed. In January, 6 months before the wedding date, I called Thomas to ask about venues they were considering. "Oh, we booked the Langham last week," he said, sounding surprised that I didn't know. Jessica found the perfect ballroom for the reception. The Langham was one of the most expensive hotels in the city. I swallowed my hurt at not being consulted, or even informed, until after the decision was made. "That sounds lovely," I said. "When can I see it?" "Maybe in a few weeks. Jessica's really busy with work right now, and she wants to coordinate all the family visits." In February, I learned they had selected their wedding cake through a passing comment Thomas made during our increasingly rare phone calls. In March, I discovered they had chosen flowers, colors, and table settings when Jessica posted photos on social media. Each revelation was a small wound, a reminder that I was an afterthought in what should have been one of the most important family events of my life. When I called to offer help with addressing invitations, Jessica answered Thomas's phone. "That's so sweet of you to offer, Caitlyn," she said with that now familiar condescension, "but we wouldn't want to burden you with all those details. Besides, my calligrapher has a very specific style we're using for all the wedding stationery." "It wouldn't be a burden," I insisted gently. "I'd love to be involved in some way." "We'll definitely find something appropriate for you to do," she assured me, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We just don't want you to feel obligated or stressed." The invitations arrived in April. Mine was addressed formally to Mrs. Caitlyn Morrison rather than Mom, as I might have expected from my own son. Inside, a handwritten note from Jessica informed me that the mother of the groom traditionally wore beige or pale blue, and she had taken the liberty of selecting several designer options at Nordstrom that would complement the wedding palette while flattering a mature figure. I set aside my pride and visited the department store only to find that the selected options started at $900, far beyond my modest retirement budget. Instead, I found a lovely, dusty rose dress on sale at a smaller boutique. When I texted a photo to Thomas, his response was delayed and brief. "Looks nice, Mom." There was no offer to help with the expense, though I knew Jessica's parents had purchased her mother's designer ensemble. In early May, I received a last-minute invitation to the bridal shower. "Jessica wanted to make sure you didn't feel obligated to attend, since it's mostly her friends and family," Thomas explained when I called, confused by the invitation that arrived 3 days before the event. "But her mom insisted you should be included." I rearranged my schedule and attended the shower at an exclusive women's club downtown. The 20 guests were seated at round tables, decorated with elaborate floral arrangements. I discovered I was placed at the furthest table from Jessica, with women I'd never met. No one had thought to give me a corsage or special name tag like the other family members wore. When gifts were opened, Jessica barely acknowledged the handmade quilt I'd spent months creating, featuring squares that represented significant moments in Thomas's life. "How crafty," she said, quickly setting it aside for the next gift, a crystal decanter set from her maid of honor. The exclusion continued with pre-wedding photographs. Thomas called 2 days before the session. "Jessica's photographer wants to do family photos in advance to save time on the wedding day," he explained. "Her parents, siblings, and grandparents are all doing portraits tomorrow at 3. "What time should I arrive?" I asked already, adjusting my mental schedule. A pause. "Actually, Mom, these are just for Jessica's side of the family. The photographer said we'll do some with you on the wedding day." I gripped the phone tighter. "But you just said it's family portraits to save time on the wedding day." "I know, but Jessica thinks it would be easier this way. There will be plenty of photos with you at the wedding." I didn't argue. What would be the point? Instead, I spent the next day alone at home knowing my son was taking family portraits that didn't include me. The dress rehearsal the night before the wedding delivered the final blow. As mother of the groom, I had always expected to be honored with certain traditions, a special corsage, a moment during the rehearsal dinner, to offer a toast, perhaps a dance with my son at the reception. Instead, I watched as Jessica's mother performed all these roles. Elaine wore a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my retirement checks. She stood center stage at the rehearsal dinner, offering an emotional toast to our children while I sat quietly at a side table. She reviewed the processional with the wedding planner, making decisions about my role without consulting me. "Caitlyn will enter just before the grandparents," she informed me, not asked me. "The blue corsage is yours. We thought it would complement your outfit." The way she eyed my simple dress made it clear she found it lacking. Thomas, standing nearby with his arm around Jessica, offered no defense or alternative. That night I returned to my empty house and cried for the first time since the engagement. I sat at my vanity studying the new lines that time had etched around my eyes, the silver strands that now outnumbered the brown in my hair. Was I being pushed aside because I didn't fit the glossy, wealthy image Jessica wanted for her wedding photos? because my presence reminded Thomas of his more humble beginnings. Through my tears, I looked at the beautiful walnut jewelry box containing the deed to our family lake house. The gift represented not just significant financial value, but decades of family memories and traditions. The property had been my parents' pride and joy, then mine, and Jack's, then a source of healing for Thomas and me after Jack died. Transferring ownership was not a decision I'd made lightly. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, remembering how my grandmother had kept her most precious items in this box. Now it held my most valuable possession, a gift of love for my only child. Despite everything, I still believed that once the wedding was over, once Jessica felt secure in her place in Thomas's life, things would improve. I had to believe that the son I'd raised with such care would eventually remember the values I'd taught him. I was wrong. The morning of Thomas's wedding arrived with perfect June weather, clear blue skies and mild temperatures. I awoke at 6, though the ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon. Sleep had been impossible, my mind cycling through a mixture of maternal pride and anxious anticipation. Despite the difficulties of the past months, this was still my only son's wedding day. I was determined to focus on joy rather than hurt. I spent extra time on my appearance, applying makeup carefully to conceal the traces of last night's tears. My hairdresser had styled my hair the previous day into a soft updo that I thought looked elegant and age-appropriate. The dusty rose dress, when I slipped it on, draped nicely over my figure. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had aged, certainly, but who had done so with dignity. I hoped Thomas would be proud to have me there. The walnut jewelry box sat on my dresser, wrapped in silver paper with a white satin bow. Inside was not only the deed to the lake house, but also a heartfelt letter, expressing my love for Thomas and my welcome to Jessica as a new daughter. Despite everything, I truly wanted their marriage to succeed, wanted them to find the kind of partnership Jack and I had shared for too brief a time. I arrived at the church 2 hours early, hoping to help with any last-minute details, or simply to spend a few quiet moments with Thomas before the ceremony. The church hall was already a flurry of activity. Florists arranging elaborate displays, photographers setting up equipment, wedding planners directing traffic with headsets and clipboards. "Can I help with anything?" I asked a young woman who appeared to be in charge. She consulted her tablet. "Are you with the wedding party?" "I'm the mother of the groom." "Oh," she scanned her list again. "Mrs. Morrison. Everything's under control, but thank you. The groom's party is in the west side chamber if you're looking for your son." I made my way through the bustling hallways to find Thomas. He was surrounded by groomsmen, looking handsome in his tuxedo, as a tailor made last-minute adjustments to his cuffs. When he saw me, his expression flickered between genuine pleasure and nervous concern. "Mom, you're early." "I thought I might be needed." I smiled, opening my arms for an embrace. He hugged me briefly, his body tense. "Everything's taken care of. Jessica's parents hired the best planners in the city." "You look so handsome," I said, straightening his boutonniere slightly. "Your father would have been so proud today." At the mention of Jack, Thomas's expression softened. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." A groomsman I didn't recognize approached. "Dude, Jessica's asking for you on the phone. Something about the flower girl's basket." Thomas's attention immediately shifted, the brief moment of connection broken. "I should take that. Wedding emergencies, you know. We'll talk more later, Mom." And he was gone, hurrying away to solve whatever crisis had emerged, leaving me standing alone among strangers who quickly resumed their conversations without including me. With 2 hours still to fill, I wandered the church grounds, eventually finding a quiet bench in the garden where I sat watching birds at a feeder. I thought about Jack, wishing desperately he could be here. He would have known how to navigate this situation with grace, would have found a way to make me feel valued without causing tension. When it was finally time for the ceremony, I was escorted to my seat by an usher who seemed unsure where I belonged. I noticed immediately that while Jessica's extended family occupied the first 4 rows on the bride's side, I sat alone in the first row of the groom's side. Thomas had few relatives. My parents were long deceased, and Jack had been an only child whose parents had also passed away. Still, the visual imbalance was striking. the bride's side overflowing with family, the groom's side populated mainly by Thomas's colleagues and friends. The ceremony itself was beautiful if impersonal. The vows were standard rather than personalized. Thomas looked nervous, but happy, as Jessica processed down the aisle on her father's arm, radiant in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car. I wiped away tears as they exchanged rings, genuinely moved despite everything. Whatever my feelings about Jessica Thomas had chosen her, and I respected his choice. At the reception in the grand ballroom of the Langham, my isolation became more pronounced. The seating chart placed me at a table far from the main wedding party, with distant acquaintances of Jessica's family, rather than with Thomas and the parents of the bride, as tradition would dictate. I smiled through dinner, making polite conversation while watching Jessica's parents occupy the seats beside Thomas at the head table. After the meal, I waited for the traditional mother-son dance that had been mentioned in the program. Instead, the DJ announced a special dance for the couple and their parents, which turned out to mean Jessica dancing with her father while Thomas danced with Jessica's mother. I remained seated, clutching my handbag, as if it could somehow shield me from the stares of pitying guests. Later, as guests mingled during the cocktail hour before the dancing began in earnest, I overheard two of Jessica's bridesmaids near the ladies' room. "God, did you see Thomas's mom's dress? So, department store clearance rack. I know, right? Jessica was worried she'd ruin the aesthetic of the wedding photos. Those wrinkles aren't exactly photogenic." They dissolved into giggles unaware. I could hear every word from my position just around the corner. I straightened my spine and walked past them with my head high, pretending I hadn't heard their cruelty. Inside, though, something hardened, like concrete setting. It was just after this encounter that Jessica herself approached me, her professional smile firmly in place. She wore her second outfit of the evening, a sleek white designer dress that probably cost thousands. "Caitlyn, there you are. I've been looking for you." "Have you?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. If she noticed, she didn't acknowledge it. "The photographer is setting up for family photos soon, and I wanted to discuss the arrangement." "Of course." I brightened, thinking perhaps I was finally being included in an important moment. Jessica's smile didn't waver as she delivered her blow. "Would you mind sitting at that table by the bathroom wall for the photos? The photographer says your age might clash with our wedding aesthetic in the family photos. We're going for a certain look, you understand." Time seemed to stop. I heard the words clearly, but my mind struggled to process such naked cruelty delivered with a pleasant expression. My heart raced, my face burned, and my hands began to shake slightly. I could feel a pressure building behind my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of tears. In that suspended moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge fully before my son had chosen someone who saw me as an embarrassment, an inconvenience to be managed, rather than family, to be cherished. And he had stood by silently as I was systematically pushed to the margins of his life. 3 options flashed through my mind. I could create a scene fight. I could comply with this humiliating request submit, or I could leave with my dignity intact flight. The choice was surprisingly easy once I framed it this way. I smiled calmly at my new daughter-in-law. "I understand perfectly." Without another word, I turned and walked deliberately toward the gift table, where my silver-wrapped package sat among more ostentatious offerings. I picked it up, tucking it under my arm as Jessica watched with a confused expression. "What are you doing?" she asked, her composure slipping for the first time. "Making a choice," I replied simply. I walked out of the ballroom through the hotel lobby and into the warm evening air. Only when I reached my car in the parking garage did I allow the tears to fall, great heaving sobs that bent me over the steering wheel. I cried for the little boy, who had once run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. I cried for the young man who had looked at me with such gratitude at his college graduation. And I cried for myself, for the mother who had given everything only to be set aside when her usefulness ended. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and tears. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a strange calm had settled over me. I carried the silver-wrapped box inside and placed it on my mantel, a symbol of boundaries finally established, of self-respect, reclaimed at great cost. The aftermath of my departure from the wedding unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. I arrived home just after 9 that evening, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. I changed out of my dress, into comfortable pajamas, made a cup of tea, and sat in my favorite armchair, staring at the walnut jewelry box, now returned to my possession. Conflicting emotions warred within me. Had I overreacted? Had I ruined my son's special day? The cruel words echoed in my mind. Your age might clash with our wedding aesthetic. No, I decided I hadn't overreacted. I had simply reached my limit after months of small humiliations. Everyone has a breaking point, and Jessica had finally found mine. Still, guilt nibbled at the edges of my resolution. Thomas would be hurt and confused. Guests would gossip. Jessica's family would have another reason to look down on me. I picked up my phone several times to call or text Thomas, then set it down again. What could I possibly say that would make this situation better? I placed the jewelry box on my fireplace mantel, where it caught the light from my reading lamp. It represented not just the material gift of the lake house, but everything I had tried to give Thomas: love, security, values, a sense of heritage. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I sat alone in my quiet house while his wedding reception continued without me. The first call came just after midnight. Thomas's name flashed on my phone screen, and I took a deep breath before answering. "Where did you go?" His voice was tight with anger and something else. Embarrassment, perhaps. People noticed you were missing. Jessica's parents were asking questions. "I left," I said simply. "You left my wedding, just walked out without saying anything to anyone. How could you do that to me, to us?" "Did Jessica tell you why I left?" A pause. She said you seemed upset about something, but she doesn't know what. She was trying to include you in the family photos. So that was the version of events she'd shared. Interesting, but not surprising. "That's not what happened, Thomas." "Then what? What was so terrible that you had to embarrass me on my wedding day?" The accusation stung, but I kept my voice steady. "Jessica asked me to sit by the bathroom wall for photos because, and I quote, my age might clash with the wedding aesthetic." Silence stretched between us. Then she wouldn't say that. "She did say that, Thomas," to my face with a smile. "You must have misunderstood. Jessica cares about you. She's been trying so hard to make you feel included." The gaslighting was the final straw. "I did not misunderstand being told I'm too old and ugly for your wedding photos." She didn't say ugly. The implication was clear. I heard muffled voices, then Jessica came on the line. "Caitlyn, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I would never say something so hurtful. I simply suggested a different seating arrangement for some of the photos, since the lighting by the main table wasn't flattering for anyone." Her voice dripped with insincere concern. I almost admired the performance. "We both know what you said, Jessica. I won't argue about it. I'm very hurt that you would think so poorly of me, especially after all we've done to include you in our special day." I nearly laughed at the audacity. "Goodbye, Jessica. Congratulations on your marriage." I hung up before she could respond, then turned off my phone. I had said what I needed to say, and nothing would be gained from further conversation tonight. They were probably still at the reception, dealing with the minor scandal of the missing mother of the groom. Let them handle it however they chose. I was done being managed and marginalized. The next morning I turned my phone back on to find 6 missed calls and numerous text messages from Thomas. I read them all but responded to none. His tone shifted from angry to worried, to pleading as the hours passed. "Mom, please call me back. Are you okay? I'm getting worried. We need to talk about what happened. Jessica feels terrible about the misunderstanding. Please don't ignore me." Around noon he called again. This time I answered. "Mom, finally. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Thomas. Just needed some time to myself." About last night, I talked more with Jessica. She says she never meant to hurt your feelings and feels awful that you misinterpreted her words. I sighed deeply. "Is that what you believe happened? A misinterpretation?" He hesitated. I don't know what to believe. Jessica wouldn't deliberately hurt you. Wouldn't she? Think about these past months, Thomas. Think about how I've been systematically excluded from every meaningful aspect of your wedding planning. Think about how I was seated far from family at the reception. Think about how I wasn't included in the parent dances. Those were just logistics. Traditions are different now. Traditions like respecting your mother, like standing up for her when she's being mistreated. You're not being fair, Mom. I'm being absolutely fair, and I'm being honest, which is more than I can say for Jessica. His voice hardened. I'm not going to let you talk about my wife that way. Your wife. Yes, she is that now. And I hope sincerely that she makes you happy, Thomas. But I will not pretend that her behavior toward me has been anything but calculated exclusion. The conversation ended poorly, with Thomas defending Jessica and me refusing to back down from what I knew to be true. The calls continued over the next few days, Thomas alternating between anger and pleading Jessica, calling to clear the air with her version of events, even Jessica's mother Elaine calling once to express her concern about my emotional state. 5 days after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Marjorie, a distant cousin of Jack's who had attended the wedding. Caitlyn, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Thomas years ago for the family Christmas card list. Not at all, Marjorie. What can I do for you? Well, she hesitated. I was at the wedding, as you know. I saw what happened, or rather, I overheard it. I was in the ladies' room and heard Jessica talking to you. She didn't know I was in the stall. My heart raced. You heard our conversation. Yes, and I want you to know, I thought it was absolutely appalling how she spoke to you. Then at brunch the next day, she told everyone you'd had some sort of emotional episode and left abruptly. I nearly choked on my mimosa at the lie. Validation from an unexpected source brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for telling me this, Marjorie. There's something else. After you left, they opened all the wedding gifts during the reception. A tacky move, if you ask me. Jessica seemed particularly intent on finding your gift. When they realized it wasn't there, she seemed genuinely upset. Thomas mentioned something about a big gift you had hinted at. So that was part of it. Jessica had expectations about my gift. Perhaps she thought she was entitled to something substantial after treating me so poorly. The irony might have been amusing under different circumstances. A week after the wedding, Thomas called again. This time, his tone was different, less defensive, more subdued. Mom, what was in the gift you took back? Ah, there it was. Finally, the real question. Something meaningful, I replied. Something intended for a son who valued his mother. Was it? Was it the lake house? Jessica's friend Madison mentioned you'd told her at the engagement party that your wedding gift would be a family property. I remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Mom, please, if it was the lake house. That's significant. We should talk about this. The gift was meant for a family that would include me, Thomas. Not as an embarrassing afterthought to be hidden by the bathroom, but as your mother, someone worthy of respect and consideration. I do respect you, Mom. Your actions suggest otherwise. The week that followed brought silence. No calls, no texts. I wondered if this was the end of our relationship, if the bridge had been burned beyond repair. The thought brought immense sadness, but I stood firm in my conviction that I had done the right thing for my own dignity and self-respect. I didn't regret leaving the wedding. I didn't regret taking back my gift. What I regretted was raising a son who could stand by while his mother was humiliated, who could choose wealth and status over the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. That failure felt like my own. The doorbell rang at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. I wasn't expecting visitors and considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. Perhaps a package delivery, or a neighbor needing to borrow something. I opened the door to find Thomas standing on my porch alone. He looked terrible, unshaven dark circles under his eyes, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt rather than his usual pressed business casual. For a moment we simply stared at each other, the gulf between us seeming both vast and paper-thin. "Can I come in?" he finally asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him into the house where he had grown up. He walked into the living room and stood awkwardly, as if suddenly uncertain of his place in this familiar space. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, falling back on the rituals of hospitality. "Please." I busied myself in the kitchen, giving us both a moment to prepare for whatever conversation was coming. When I returned with 2 mugs, Thomas had seated himself on the couch, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. "Thank you," he said, accepting the coffee. "Then after a long sip, "I owe you an apology, Mom." The words hung in the air between us. I sat in my armchair waiting for him to continue. "I talked to Cousin Marjorie," he said. "She told me what really happened at the wedding. What Jessica actually said to you." I nodded slowly. "I see." At first I didn't want to believe it. It seemed so cruel. Not like the Jessica I thought I knew. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, but then I started thinking about other things. Comments she'd made about you when we were alone. The way she always had some reason why you couldn't be included in wedding decisions. How she'd roll her eyes when I mentioned our Sunday dinners. "Why are you here, Thomas?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Because I failed you. Because I let someone treat my mother, the woman who gave up everything for me, like she was disposable. Because I was so afraid of losing Jessica that I convinced myself her behavior was normal." "Afraid of losing her?" I repeated, confused by his choice of words. Thomas set down his coffee mug and leaned back suddenly, looking exhausted. "Jessica. She's always had this power over me. From our first date, I felt like I was auditioning for the role of her husband. Like I wasn't quite good enough, but if I tried hard enough, changed enough, maybe I could be worthy of her." The admission broke my heart. This insecurity didn't sound like the confident son I'd raised. Every time I did something she didn't approve of, she'd become cold, distant. She'd cancel plans or ignore my calls. Then when I'd apologize, even if I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong, she'd reward me with affection again. It became this cycle I couldn't break. "That's not love, Thomas. That's control." "I know that now." He looked directly at me for the first time. But I was in too deep to see it clearly. When she started making comments about you, about your home, your clothes, your age, I should have shut it down immediately. Instead, I made excuses. I told myself, she just came from a different world, that she didn't mean to be hurtful. And now I can't unsee it. After the wedding, after you left, something changed. Jessica was furious, not just about you leaving, but about the missing gift. She kept talking about what you might have been planning to give us, speculating about its value. It was like a mask had slipped, and I could suddenly see her clearly. I remained silent, letting him continue his revelation. "We had a huge fight the day after the wedding. I finally confronted her about how she'd treated you, and she didn't even deny it. She said, 'Your mother needs to understand her place in our lives now. Her place, Mom. Like you were a servant to be managed rather than my mother.'" Thomas's voice broke on the last word, and tears welled in his eyes. "I left the reception early that night after you were gone, told everyone I wasn't feeling well. I've been staying at Rob's apartment for the past week, trying to figure out what to do next." My eyes drifted to the walnut jewelry box still sitting on my mantel. Thomas followed my gaze. "Is that it, the gift?" I nodded. May I see what it was?" I hesitated, then rose to retrieve the box. I placed it on the coffee table between us but didn't open it. This box belonged to my grandmother. She kept her most precious possessions in it. Her wedding ring, letters from my grandfather during the war, a lock of my mother's baby hair. I ran my fingers over the polished wood. "I've had it since she died when I was 30. It's been waiting for the right moment, the right purpose." Thomas looked at the box with new understanding. "It's beautiful. What's inside is what matters." I opened the lid to reveal an envelope and a set of keys. "This is the deed to the lake house, Thomas. I was giving you and Jessica full ownership of the property." His face registered shock as he processed the significance. The lake house property was worth well over $400,000 in the current market, representing the bulk of my estate and retirement security. "Mom, no. That's your safety net. your inheritance from Grandma and Grandpa. It was meant to be your inheritance, too. A place for your children to experience the same joy you did growing up. A continuation of family traditions. Thomas picked up the deed with trembling hands, reading the legal transfer that had been prepared, but not yet filed with the county. This is incredible. And I nearly threw it away because I was too weak to stand up for what's right. Not weak, I corrected gently. Manipulated. There's a difference. Jessica knew about this, didn't she? That's why she was so angry about the missing gift. I never told her specifically, but I did mention to several people that my wedding gift would be a significant family heirloom. Perhaps she heard rumors. Thomas carefully replaced the deed in the box and closed the lid. I can't accept this, Mom. Not now, not like this. I'm not offering it now, I clarified. The gift was meant for a different circumstance, a different relationship. He nodded, understanding. My marriage is likely over before it's truly begun. I'm meeting with a lawyer next week to discuss annulment options. I'm sorry, Thomas. Don't be. I'm the one who should be sorry, and I am more than I can express. He reached for my hand across the coffee table. Can you forgive me, Mom, for forgetting what really matters? For treating you as less important than someone who never truly loved me? I took his offered hand, feeling the familiar contours of fingers I had once bandaged after childhood accidents, had once guided through homework assignments, had once watched, accept a college diploma. I already have, Thomas. You're my son. That never changed even when it hurt. We talked for hours that day, revisiting painful moments but also remembering good times. Thomas shared more details about his relationship with Jessica, helping me understand how her emotional manipulation had gradually separated him from his own values and perceptions. I told him about the loneliness of these past months, the sense of loss that had nothing to do with aging and everything to do with feeling replaced. By afternoon, something had shifted between us. The breach wasn't fully healed. That would take time and consistent effort, but the foundation for reconciliation had been laid. Thomas left with a promise to return for dinner the following weekend, a small first step toward rebuilding our traditional Sunday meals. As I closed the door behind him, I noticed the walnut jewelry box still sitting on the coffee table. The lake house deed remained inside, its future uncertain. What was certain was that I would never again compromise my self-respect, even for those I loved most. That lesson had come at a high cost, but its value was immeasurable. 3 months after the wedding, that wasn't really a beginning, but an ending autumn painted the trees around my neighborhood in brilliant shades of red and gold. Much had changed in that short time. Thomas and Jessica's marriage had officially ended through annulment, a process made easier by Jessica's family's desire to avoid scandal. According to Thomas, once Jessica realized the lake house deed was no longer a possibility, she quickly agreed to end the marriage, revealing where her true priorities had always been. My own healing journey progressed in unexpected ways. The week after Thomas's visit, I received a call from Eleanor, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. She had heard about the wedding incident through mutual acquaintances and called to check on me. I always thought you were too good for those snobs, she declared loyally. How about lunch next Tuesday? We can catch up properly. That lunch rekindled a friendship that became a cornerstone of my new life. Eleanor introduced me to her book club, 5 women our age who welcomed me warmly. For the first time in years, I had social connections that were entirely my own, not defined by my role as Thomas's mother. I also finally enrolled in the art classes I'd been postponing since Jack died. 3 evenings a week, I lost myself in watercolors and charcoal sketches, rediscovering a passion that had been dormant for decades. My instructor, noting my natural eye for composition, encouraged me to submit work to a local senior artists exhibition. To my surprise, 2 of my landscapes sold on opening night. Thomas and I established a new tradition of Wednesday dinners, allowing us both to reclaim our Sundays for personal activities. These meals became a space for honest conversation and gradual rebuilding of trust. He brought groceries each week, and we cooked together something we hadn't done since he was a teenager, learning to make his father's famous chili recipe. During one such dinner in late September, Thomas broached a subject we had carefully avoided. I've been seeing a therapist, he said as we cleared the dishes, working through why I let Jessica treat both of us, so poorly. I nodded encouragingly, but let him continue without interruption. Dr. Mercer helped me see patterns from past relationships, how I've always been drawn to people who make me work for approval. She thinks it might stem from losing Dad so young, this fear of abandonment that makes me cling to people even when they're bad for me. That makes sense, I said carefully. Your father's death was traumatic for both of us. The thing is, Mom, I never felt that way with you. You were always my safe harbor, the person who loved me unconditionally. Maybe that's why I took you for granted, because I never doubted you'd be there. The insight brought tears to my eyes. I will always be there for you, Thomas. But now I know I need to be there for myself too. That's exactly what Dr. Mercer said. She thinks what you did at the wedding was actually really healthy, setting a boundary when someone treated you disrespectfully. We smiled at each other, this new understanding creating a deeper connection than before. In early October, I made a decision about the lake house. Rather than transferring ownership immediately, I would reclaim it for myself first. The property had stood mostly vacant for years, used only for occasional weekend visits. It was time to change that. I invited Eleanor and the book club ladies for a long weekend at the lake. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the 6 of us piling out of 2 cars with suitcases, grocery bags, and bottles of wine. The house welcomed us with its familiar wooden charm, though it needed airing out and a good cleaning. That weekend became a celebration of friendship and new beginnings. We swam in the cool lake water, built evening fires in the stone pit by the shore, and stayed up late sharing stories of our lives, marriages, children losses, dreams deferred, and dreams fulfilled. I saw the property through fresh eyes, appreciating its beauty and significance in a way I hadn't for years. On Sunday morning, as we sat on the dock drinking coffee and watching a family of ducks paddle by, Eleanor squeezed my hand. You know, Caitlyn, I've never seen you look so at peace. Walking out of that wedding might have been the best thing you ever did for yourself. She was right. The pain of Thomas's betrayal had been excruciating, but it had forced me to examine my own worth separate from my identity as a mother. At 67, I was discovering new aspects of myself, new possibilities I had never considered. When Thomas came for dinner the following Wednesday, I presented him with a gift, a photo album he had created for me on my 50th birthday, filled with pictures of our life together. I had added new photos from recent months. Thomas helping me plant my garden, the 2 of us at a baseball game, a selfie from our hiking trip to Redwood Park. What's this for? He asked, turning the pages slowly. A reminder of who we really are to each other. Not what Jessica tried to make us, not what her family wanted to see, but our true history and bond. He lingered over a photo of himself at age 10, proudly holding a fish he'd caught off the lake house dock while I stood beside him, beaming with pride. I miss the lake house, he admitted. Some of my best memories are there. We'll go again soon, I promised. Maybe for Thanksgiving this year. Just us. I'd like that. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Thomas spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about what happened with Jessica, trying to understand it. The thing that keeps coming back to me is how differently she treated people based on what she thought they could do for her. Her boss, her wealthy friends, her parents, all treated with perfect respect. But waiters, shop clerks, you. She saw you as obstacles or tools, not as human beings deserving dignity. That's a powerful insight, I said. I never want to be that person, Mom. Never want to value people based on their usefulness or status. You won't be. That's not how I raised you, and it's not who you are at heart. As darkness fell outside my kitchen window, I realized we had reached a new understanding. The painful events of the wedding had forced both of us to grow in unexpected ways. Thomas was learning to recognize manipulation and stand firm in his values. I was learning that self-respect wasn't selfish, but necessary, that boundaries weren't walls, but healthy definitions of where one person ended and another began. The walnut jewelry box still sat on my mantel, but its meaning had changed. It no longer represented a rejected gift, but a symbol of my own worth, a reminder that I deserved respect, regardless of my age or economic status. You know, I said, as Thomas prepared to leave that evening, standing up for yourself, isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's refusing to give in to mistreatment. He hugged me tightly. I'm learning that from you, Mom. Still learning from you after all these years. As I watched him drive away, I felt a sense of profound peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led us both to a better place, one where authentic love and mutual respect formed the foundation of our relationship. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because they didn't treat you with respect? I hope my story reminds you that you deserve to be valued no matter your age or circumstances. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult moments. Share in the comments a time when standing up for yourself changed your life. I read every comment and would love to connect with you. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true family treasures your presence, not just your presence.